Right.
Namaste all, and welcome to Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad.
Today's subject is perfecting the Siddhis, with a great amount taken from the record of yoga.
Yes. I've been speaking of taking examples from Sri Aurobindo's entries, and we finally come to that. Before entering that, though, in closure of the examples that we saw last time, there were both positive as well as negative examples of use of the Siddhis in very ordinary human circumstances of business, and sometimes merely as an exercise through the life force, vital energy. There's one comment or one question which came from Hanael, where she asked, it clarifies a lot of things about miracles and risks to give this power to vital beings. But then if some powers appear during our sadhana, should we discard them or have doubts about their origin? Shall we better not use them and keep sticking to our focus on the closeness to the Divine Mother in consciousness? Or should we use it as a divine gift, but with a discernment and carefully? So there are actually three possibilities. The first, which he refers to powers of vital beings, that is to be shunned. So we don't even discuss that now in what we are discussing here. These are purely powers of consciousness, even if they be through the vital consciousness or combination of vital mental, and nowhere involving other beings. This is very clear. But the second option, she says, is should we doubt their origin? Should we avoid engaging with them and keep our exclusive focus on the contact with the divine consciousness, with the Divine Mother? Or should we use the gift with discernment? So between these two, I want to elaborate on the question. It was also raised several times by Rajarshi about the hesitation that comes from the moral aspect of as if controlling someone or a situation, overriding their free will, etc. And where would that come into the picture? So as far as possible, I drew on examples where we are in any case in a battle of influences, as in the case of business or in a conflict where each one is trying to extract their benefit out of some struggle of a situation. Then in any case, you're exercising your will to override somebody else's freedom or will or possibilities and extract some benefit or work together to find a best via media. In any case, there is an overriding of some kind. And in such cases, whether you use internal or external means, whether you do it consciously or unconsciously, it's almost irrelevant because at least unconsciously you are doing it. So on that level, it's as if we are avoiding the moral question. Of course, if you cross a certain threshold, again, the morality comes back. So I want to highlight the necessity of this phase of the moral consideration as necessary as long as we are in a consciousness where we feel ourselves primarily driven by self-interest and narrow self-interest. As soon as your interests widen to become less selfish, or even if it's self-interest, it is a wider inclusive self-interest, then the moral hesitations become somewhat less important. Still, it's a passage. From there, when you consciously open to what is it that would be the will or the interest of the divine, at that point, you are as if preparing yourself to transition out from the morality and ethics based, which is a mental constructed framework, to something which is more innately true and spontaneously true of the soul values or the divine will. And I would focus now on this space. And we would hope that for many of us, at least a first entry into this space has been made sufficiently, even though we are oscillating between two states. In this space, you either become more conscious of what the divine will intends, or you feel within you, deep within, in the influence of the psychic, to whatever extent it reaches the surface, you feel in that influence spontaneously a discomfort or an acceptance of something being done or preparing for a transition into a more free poise of a higher value system that exceeds morality and ethics. You would not jump into that before the contact of the consciousness or the psychic sensitivity would be reasonably accessible. They may not be constant, they may not be perfect, they may be mixed, but at least they're accessible. And then you're preparing for this transition. If that's not accessible, morality is your protection. So I would suggest for all of us to make this effort. And rather than saying, oh, I will close this and block it off, it's happening, I notice, I can block it, ignore it, or as Hanail says, with discernment and carefully as a divine gift. And so we read Sri Aurobindo's 4 requirements, 4 conditions under which it can be utilized. Reread that, remind yourself of that repeatedly. And again, there's a division between 2 types. There are those who are temperamentally more experimental in this space. And there are those for whom, yeah, it's interesting. I saw that it works. Let me move on. It's not so important for me. And they're not experimenting in this domain, but would rather feel something else more valuable. Observe your temperament, observe your nature. Observe also sometimes whether there is a spontaneously an action that comes from within, from the soul's influence, or even from the higher influence of the divine will, that nudges you to work, to perfect, to develop, to refine, to explore or experiment with certain things for a while, and then it may withdraw. Observe. If that is clear, allow that to flow and carry you. If that is not clear, let your nature find its satisfaction to the extent it needs. And if it then moves on to other things, it's fine also. For some, though, there is a need to make everything perfect. Because the perfection in the integral yoga is of all planes and of all parts of our being and of our nature. Everything, all is to be included, all is to be exalted, divinized, and perfected. So we're going to see examples of Sri Aurobindo when he takes that. So this is one way you may find this transition to be helpful. But last, I want to share one incident which is, to my temperament, the most helpful. I'm not saying it is the same for all, but it might be for you or it may not. And this incident will perhaps help to highlight what is possible and which may be also more comfortable to many. And that is, even as some of these faculties or experiences begin to flower out, you notice them, you observe their working, but you're conscious that the flowering out is a natural outcome, or even their exercise is a natural outcome of the working of the divine Shakti in you and not of your working or your effort. Or you may call upon the Shakti for help and you find she does it, not you. So I'll give an example which was quite amazing. I've shared it long ago here. I had to travel out of station with a businessman friend who was going for his work and he wanted to take me along for a specific reason. And it was important that I go with him. And he was going to Dubai. In those days, this must be now 15 years ago, or at least, maybe 20, or 15. And we had a system in the Indian passport that there's a particular mark which was there, which meant that you had to be double checked for going into the Middle East so that you were not trapped because of, there were a lot of scams where poor people from India were hired, their passports taken away, and then they were treated as slaves. And many of them couldn't read or write. So they would sign or put their thumb impression on some paper, not knowing what it is they were committing to, and then they were bound in these contracts. So there was a little marker that said, the person who has the passport we have no evidence that he's crossed a certain educational level, and so such a person should be prevented from going to the Middle East. And as it turned out, when I had applied for my passport, I had not given educational qualifications, so my marker was active. So I'm going with this friend of mine. We're about to board, and at the last stage when they check your passport and visa, the fellow says, you need to be double checked. And he sends me off to he says, you don't have this marker, you cannot go through first. So I said, hey, but this is not acceptable. Please, can I do something? And after a lot of trouble, finally he says, okay, we can try and have you go to a senior person who may or may not approve your travel, but I cannot let you go. It was very clear. So I go to the senior person. I was told the senior person normally would come early in the morning. We would have missed the flight. This was already late at night. And then, uh, as it turned out, the junior of the senior was there, or his deputy was there. And he looks at the same thing. He says, no, no way. Sorry, we cannot allow you. I try to explain to him. I try to argue out. Sorry, rules, rules, rules. Bureaucracy at its worst. And so I'm frustrated. I've tried everything. I've given up hope. That's when generally we turn to the higher help normally. So something within me says, there's no other option left. I have to ask help from the Divine Mother. So I consciously disengaged from the whole situation, concentrated, entered in deep connection with the Divine Mother, invoking her, opening the situation to her. And as the center of consciousness went deeper and deeper, closer to the influence of the psychic, in that immersion, I was in this state. I had on the surface, I had left it all and just focused on her presence. This man who's talking, my friend was trying to argue. This man who's talking said, no, it's not possible. And his right hand suddenly lifts up. He's on the desk. Suddenly his right hand lifts up. He says, not possible. Sorry. And then his right hand goes down and opens a drawer. And he's still talking to my friend and arguing and saying, no, not possible. His right hand picks up now a rubber stamp. And by then my friend is observing this. What is this fellow doing? His hand is moving while he's saying no. And then he takes my passport and stamps with his rubber stamp and says, no, not possible. And then gives me the passport and he has cleared me to go. It was such an amazing exercise of pure divine intervention. Exercising, I suppose if you had to use the technical terms, it would be a direct exercise of Aishwaryam or Vashita on the person, on their physical body, literally getting him to do something while his mind is actively saying no. And he stamps it internally to his own mind. He would have just justified it in some way because he had done it. He gives it to me and then looks away. And I just thanked him profusely and we left. It's a very beautiful example of how you don't do anything. You open yourself, your life, your circumstances, your work, your efforts to the Divine Mother as completely as possible, infusing her in the space, you and in the environment and in your work, opening to her, asking her to do what is best, asking her to mold, shape, guide, lead the circumstances, lead you as well as others in the circumstances. And for many who are in the natural opening of the heart and the devotion, or in the practice of the consecrated service, this kind of relationship is more natural, and giving to her and asking her to intervene where needed in the way she chooses is more natural. And so, yes, these powers might still operate by her directly, in you, through your circumstances, but you have at no point the sense that you are doing something or developing certain faculties, etc. So especially when it came to powers of or capacities of power, I have from childhood have a natural hesitation, and there's a natural turn to the character of capacities of knowledge. So knowledge above all, power, hesitation, or even a kind of a withdrawal from. And it has always been the case in the nature. I'm pointing this out, not saying it's a good thing, not saying it's a bad thing, it's just turn of nature. Broadly, I would say there are two kinds of nature. There are those who prioritize purity over power of action. There are those who prioritize power and action over purity or knowledge. And it's just a question of your nature type. Perhaps in another life, one may switch that, or even in this life, one may switch. But In your nature, one of these tends to prioritize in the natural unfoldment in the sadhana. So in certain cases for me, it would be so strong that if I did not have clarity, or if I didn't feel I was in the purity of the state for to be clear that the action was really transparent, I would refuse to act. This is very convenient for the inertia layer because I don't feel I'm in the right state. I'm not going to act. I'm going to wait. So the inertia would often seize upon this to avoid action. Whereas others who say, it doesn't matter whether I'm in the best state or not, we have to get it done. We just do it. They'll get the work done. Even if it's mixed, at least things move forward. So I had to struggle against my own nature to be able to find the right balance of where and how much to compromise. But I'm just showing this as a possibility. For some, it might be helpful to work in this way rather than even engaging with certain capacities. Nevertheless, there will still happen a situation where certain capacities naturally open and unfold. And you may find yourself exercising or not consciously, or just allowing her to act, calling upon her help where necessary, again, consciously or not, and the thing would be done. You will still feel occasionally it'll happen through you. It'll happen using a part of your consciousness. A part of your mind will turn with a need or a want, and then the thing will flow through that. But you'll be conscious it is her energy, her power that operates through that, through your nature, through your thought or emotion or action. So this is, I think, closing the part of examples from others, and we now come straight to Sri Aurobindo's own examples. Now, in the whole of the record of yoga, going into 2 volumes, is full of these. Initially, very regularly, almost daily, he has notes. After a certain stage where certain of these operations, higher operations of consciousness, have been reasonably stabilized, he is only referring to them occasionally or in their higher working when there is something worth noting. Otherwise, they've got mostly stabilized. And you can see the rapidity with which he goes from, let's say, 1909, when he starts, to 1914 in about 5 years. By the time the mother comes, he is already largely centered in the experiences of the supramental consciousness and what he later called the overmental consciousness. And he's in that domain generally for most of the operations. And so even for the operations of these siddhis, it is a working from that higher consciousness. And so even the siddhis have been lifted to their true working, no more merely operating through the vital or mental or other layers of the will. So we'll look at some very quick examples of how he notes. And I'm starting with something very basic in a very early stage. This is 24th June, 1909. And a lot of Sanskrit vocabulary. But you see the detail with which he notes things. Here, Tejo Rekha. Tejo, intense, Rekha, lines of woman's figure. N, girl's arm with bracelet. Speech of J continues consecutively in Swapnavastha. Swapna, dream, avastha, state. In dream state, speech of J continues consecutively. Why, how, what it means, he's not bothered. He's just documenting prophecies definite for 6 months. Something is going, he's being given perceptions of things definite. Prison grating. He's perceiving something. Crowd with one face close and vivid. Sukshma, meaning subtle. Sukshma touches on feet, frequent. First in Swapnavastha, in dream state, then in Jagrat, in waking state. You are. Now, you are occasionally comes, which possibly, and we can speculate, represents the Urdhva Retas as a turning of the whole consciousness upwards, and the whole physical energy itself turns upwards and subtilizes in amplification. Faces and figures, frequent. Bedstead on matted floor. Chairs like in S office. Why is he bothering to note? These are visions, perceptions appearing spontaneously. Dark, thick cross. Namadrishtis. Name, perceptions or visions of names. Luminous space developing with chayas, shadows. Chayamaya of mountain peaks, shadowy image of mountain peaks. Bow of color, deep red, blue, and an exquisite violet pink, etc. Now, it's just showing you the diversity of experiences. Face of Upen Sen of Barisal. Figure of boy rushing on another, catching round shoulders and ankles and lifting up in his arms. Food. Figure of boy putting down vegetable with some wooden instrument. A crowd of Indians, face of Sudhir. A crowd, one figure conspicuous with khaki cap. Indian sannyasi with strong face in Geruya. So he's describing all kinds of images which are popping up. Mohammedan boy pulling a Hindu back. Then they stand released. European with a face like Roo boys. Heavy sleep full of dreams. Now, I'm going to skip this kind of text because you get an idea of what he's noting. Now comes something very specific. Tratak of sun. This is gazing on the sun with eyes open or closed, physical closed but subtle open. Then the variations to that. But he's doing Tratak on the sun. Generally, these things are done on the rising sun, so it's not too harsh on the eyes. Probably. He doesn't mention the time here. After first gaze, saw in Chittakasha some exquisite deep green color. Now, Chitta Akasha is different from Chid Akasha. Chid Akasha would represent the pure consciousness and the space or the ether of pure consciousness. Chitta Akasha is the mental consciousness and the space or ether of mental consciousness. So, in the mental grade of perception, most exquisite deep green color, sun with zigzag of this color coming out of it. Sun with a zigzag of deep green coming out. Now, if you've ever looked at this, if you know what this is, you've seen symbols of this somewhere. And apparently, even in Europe, this symbol of the sun with many zigzags coming out were considered to be in the occult traditions, one of the symbols for some aspect or power of the sun. It's from these symbols that the Nazis drew many of their symbolism also, often from the runes and the German runes traditions. But it's a very classic symbol. Tratak for minute. Sun, sometimes pale yellow, sometimes bluish green. Now, obviously, you can see it's not the physical sun he's seeing or physical colors. A commotion and waves of some subtle substances in it, in what he's seeing of the sun. Closed eyes in chitta. So in the subtle mental grade, he's closing the eye. Yellowish green with roundish patch of blue in it, gazing into physical sky. Large patch of deep yellow floated before the eyes. He's just recording in detail, but you see the precision of the detailed notes. Why would he do that? So there are two reasons. One is, of course, he's documenting for himself, but on some level, perhaps he's also ensuring that in posterity, perhaps if these texts are made available, there'll be the evidence of the stages through which he went through. In the same way as the mother used the agenda as a record of the stages through which she went through for completing the work of the physical transformation. Now, I'm going to jump to another portion, which is 1911, 28th January, and it is titled Record of Ideal Cognitions. And a series of short notations. I saw the time by the watch in the sitting room to be 2:40. Ideally cognized the time by my watch to be 2:43. Verified exact to the minute. So, watch in the sitting room to be 2:40, he perceives. He's not there. And by the higher perception, cognize the time by his watch to be 2:43. Verified exact to the minute. A little later, after a chase of the opposite house dog having lost the intellectual idea of the time, I ideally cognized it to be 2:50, verified, exact to the second. So something happens, the mind is distracted by the chase of the opposite house dog. So there's the loss of time, and then he comes back and again perceives through the inner sight. Third entry. All rooms being closed, I ideally perceived that all were asleep. Verified immediately afterwards by no one moving when the servant repeatedly banged for admission at the door. So he's sitting in his room. All the doors of all the rooms are closed, and he perceives that all are asleep. Maybe someone could have been awake, you don't know. And then that's verified because the servant bangs on the door, no one responds. 4. Sortilege with cards. So sortilege is a French term originally that you take from a deck of cards, paper, or some textbook, sacred text. You open somewhere, and whatever comes, you take as a message for you. Of course, the interpretation can always be doubtful, but you take that as a message, and it might indicate something useful. So he's doing this with cards, playing cards. First, I took out cards, making a sum of 21, Jack, 9, and Ace, and dividing by 3 got 7 o'clock. Then, for the minutes, took out Queen, 10, and 9, making 31, and dividing by 3 got 10 and 1/3. The cognition then gave the already prophesied ejection of the internal opposition to higher thought as the subject of the sortilege. I took it by intellectual habit and inference as meaning 7:10 p.m. The incident actually occurred at 10 minutes to 7. Very interesting. So he's looking for when a particular incident would take place. And of course, you can have the same ideal cognition directly seeing the time. Or in this case, he's doing it through the process of sortilege, and he's testing how it works. And the method which he gives you, I've never seen it being used elsewhere. I've never read of it. It's the first time I'm seeing a method like this. You take 3 cards and you average out the total. And that would be the first time you go with the intention, that's the hour. The second time you go with, that's the minute. So, of course, there would be certain limitations because you might not be able to get all the minutes. You won't get up to 60 because once you divide by 3 to get the average. But it's an interesting idea that when there is a certain intention, the intention working out in the physical domain is not perfect. It would slant circumstances towards it. So every attempt that you make would be a little bit off. But if you make several attempts and make an average of that, you would find something tending towards a particular outcome. That's the idea of the averaging. So for example, if it had been perfect, he could have simply pulled out the 10 and it would have said 10 o'clock. It's not perfect, so it's a blend of Jack, 9, Ace. But already in the mind, there is that intention that I'm going to do an average of 3. So the chance of getting an accurate number in a mixed deck, bypassing the precision of the requirement of 10 exact to come, is much greater if you do a blend like this. So it's an interesting exercise. He gets 10, he gets 10 and 1/3. Sorry, he gets 7 and then 10 and 1/3. He assumes that it's going to be 10 minutes past 7, which actually happens 10 minutes before 7. So here he gives an explanation. The cognition then gave the already prophesied ejection of the internal opposition to higher thought as the subject of the sortilege. So the subject of the sortilege is there's an internal opposition to higher thought. As the higher thought comes, there's something within which is opposing, and that is going to be ejected. This resistance is going to be ejected. And this is the deeper cognition saying, now this is going to happen. And then he comes to this outcome. So remember, this is still at a pretty early stage in considering in the yoga, and he's operating on a physical level, which is very different from the ideal cognition, which would have probably got the time very accurately, directly, as was already present even 2 years before. Number 5 entry. Figure 3 in Drishti. Drishti is inner perception. Interpreted as rupees 3 worth of books to be purchased. Subsequently, February 2nd, selected a number of 6 annas books without calculating the price, found that it amounted to rupees 3. So he's gone to buy certain books, picks up 6 books, and total comes to exactly 3. So you see, if you just saw the 3, you wouldn't know what it means. But there's already some deeper working of the intuition which helps him to interpret that it's rupees 3 worth of books to be purchased, which turns out to be right. 2 people applied to see me at the door. This is the next item. Not seen by me. So somebody has come at the door, one of his disciples is handling it. Cognition that they were detectives. I heard immediately afterwards that they had asked for the Indian sociologists and liberator. So yes, they were detectives, it was confirmed. So he's sitting in his room downstairs. This is probably happening in the playground guest house. He's upstairs and the first floor. In America, it would be second floor. And so he's upstairs, and on the ground, 2 people have come and somebody is attending to them. He hears them ask for this, liberator and sociologist. Entry 7. I had a cognition formerly that the man calling himself Ram Rao Yogi was a detective, independent of all inference. So he has this perception already. There's no external support to this. Learned on February 1 of a police report in which he is mentioned as watching the trains and taken for some time by the others as a Bande Mataram man. So somebody is informing him of police reports also. So it's interesting. It gives us a very interesting insight that he has withdrawn from active involvement in the freedom struggle in British India. He's in French India for his sadhana. He has to make sure he's seen to not be engaging anything externally also, because otherwise they would have either imprisoned him or deported him to British India. So, but he has connections of people who are informing what's happening, give him inside information. So he's comparing things with what he already perceived, and then he gets confirmation. Number 8, confirmation by B, probably Bijoy, of my cognition of the new change of soul in the dog. This is very suggestive. Remember, we had read a passage earlier about how Sri Aurobindo had, through his power of prakamya, infused into the dog a certain shift of consciousness. Possibly it relates to something happening with that dog. So you see here an experimentation being done with dogs, to which he had access directly or indirectly. At a certain stage in the ashram, the mother, when the mother was there at a very early stage, they actually worked on cats and dogs for a while, and with this exploration of the possibilities of what can be done. Number 9, cognition by prakamya of improvement in Saurin's health without seeing him, justified by fact. Now these are very simple things, but a variety of them, and he is documenting them to show also how things are being stabilized in his capacity. We go to the next entry, which is 10th February 1910. 1911. Item 10. A man came calling outside. Immediate cognition by prakamya on seeing him, and revelation acting in confirmation of each other that he was a detective. It turned out to be Ram Rao Yogi, the detective from Maharashtra side. Now here is a very interesting description. Someone comes outside, the prakamya, as he Sri Aurobindo looks, the prakamya, which is a spontaneous turn of the consciousness now reaching out, touching into or entering into the other's consciousness, perceives this. And at the same time, there is the revelation which is coming from the higher source of the intuitive functioning. So we're going to discuss the operations of intuition separately. But right now, it's what we see in his record is the two are working together simultaneously and confirming each other. So the intuition itself has 4 facets: intuition, inspiration, revelation, and discrimination. They're all four facets of the intuitive mind. And this is the revelatory portion, which reveals by vision. So as he looks at the man, it's as if the vision reveals, oh, this man is a detective. So at the same time, the prakamya is operating, the revelation is working, and he's conscious of these two operations as distinct operations, confirming each other. Now, again, I want to point this out as an example of the clarity, richness, multiplicity of consciousness in which things are happening on multiple levels, layers, parts of consciousness, and he's conscious of all of them at the same time. Now, you can imagine this is not easy to do if your life is busy with some external work. I have to finish this, I have 3 hours to finish and I have to work on it. And occasionally the intuition flashes, you notice. But you do not have at that point necessarily the consciousness or the attentiveness needed to distinguish finer aspects, nuances, facets, or to work upon them, or to work upon distinguishing them, etc. And you can understand why Sri Aurobindo found it necessary to withdraw from external interactions to dedicate himself to the sadhana, because it requires that kind of real full engagement, full focus, full immersion in the rich complexity of things happening, or to which he is open to and working upon them on all these parts. And you get glimpses of this in such passing comments. Number 11, Trikal Drishti, that Shri, probably Srinivasachari, etc., would not come this evening, confirmed. So there's an appointment set. He has the Trikala Drishti perception. So it is the vision of time, past, present, future, in that perception, which is different from Vyapti, Prakamya, or revelation. It's a different function, a third altogether different function. In that, he sees that they will not come. And then it's confirmed. Remember, in those days, no mobile phones, no telephones. So how are you to know? Somebody is far away. He set an appointment several days ago. He can't come. How is he to inform you? The only way to inform is for someone to come and tell you, right? So until it actually happens that someone comes, there's no way to know. But he gets it through the Tikal Drishti. Now understand, if this is happening to him so easily and spontaneously, consider what must be happening when each time that someone is coming to meet him, totally new person, how much he might already know of the person before they came, or if he chooses to know more, how much more he could know of them, or if they sat or when they sat before him, how much he could know spontaneously without special effort, and then how much more he could know when he chooses to really enter deeply. And you get an idea of the kind of the state of consciousness from which he was operating. And this is at an early stage of the sadhana, remember, 2 years into the sadhana. Entry 12. Trikala Drishti, that tomorrow, S, perhaps Saurin, will be restored to health. Already recovering it, fully confirmed. So Sri Aurobindo writes fully confirmed the next day, because after it has happened, he adds the entry. 13th entry. Sukshma Shabda. Sukshma is subtle, Shabda sound, subtle sound. So it's not a physical sound. He hears on a deeper level. Sukshma Shabda of the dog under the table, attended with strong prakamya of its presence and motion there. So at the same time as he hears the subtle sound, he senses by the prakamya projection of his own consciousness, its presence and movement under the table. An image of the past. We don't know what that would be. We continue a few more entries. Again, this is 11th February, 1911. Entry 14. Confirmation of former cognition that M. Moni, although apparently unconcerned, had really a touch in the prana about his brother's death, confirmed by his statement about dreams and weeping. So Sri Aurobindo has this cognition, Moni is one of the disciples there, that Moni is pretending to be unconcerned, but internally, in his emotional nature, there is a disturbance regarding his brother's death. Externally, he shows lack of concern. Sri Aurobindo senses this already, that there is this touch in the prana is his euphemism for saying disturbance in the life energy, not merely emotions, but in the physical life energy. And this is confirmed when Moni tells him that about certain dreams and he's weeping in the dreams. And so that confirms that on that layer there is this disturbance and it pops up only in the dream state, which Sri Aurobindo had already seen beforehand. And it's confirmed by this external. So you see also Sri Aurobindo is meticulously documenting not just what he perceives, but the validation of what is perceived. Sometimes it's been perceived a few weeks or months ago, it's just got validated, he documents it. The documentation is critical. Otherwise, you could be lost in your own fantasy world and you had no way of ensuring whether it's true or not. And you could imagine all kinds of things. So we have to learn from this. If ever you have a perception, do not assume that it's correct just because you had a correct perception once. Nor should you doubt. Simply hold it provisionally and wait for confirmation externally. And then you notice where there's an alignment, where there's a partial confirmation, where something is partially off, like 10 minutes past 7 or 10 minutes before 7. So what's the correction to be done in your perception? You observe these things. Next entry, 15. Cognition by prakamya trikala drishti of evacuation in the afternoons. So he's going to pass motions, but there's a cognition by prakamya and trikala drishti. Interesting. 13th February 1911. Vyapti from Saurin of the idea of making the tea. Immediately after I heard him talk of it, and a minute after he came and made it. So the Vyapti here is, remember, the consciousness from somebody from outside you entering and as if striking into you. So he receives this impression from Saurin of his idea of making tea. Sri Aurobindo perceives as that idea now enters his consciousness. Immediately after, Saurin talks about it, and a minute later, he comes and makes it. So whenever a person starts doing something, thinks of doing something, all these are coming onto Sri Aurobindo vividly, precisely, and in great detail, as we will see. Sri Aurobindo describes all the facets later on of the kind of precision and detail. Now imagine this Sri Aurobindo has with relation to all his devotees, obviously those immediately around him as attendants, those with whom he's interacting, at least at the time when he's interacting, those whom he holds in his consciousness, whether he's physically interacting or not. And at some point you will see even those who might be very, very far away, and he's aware of what's happening in them or can choose to be aware to whatever extent he wants to. I will share here another example which was narrated to me. It's very poignant. I've shared it perhaps not in this evening series ever, I think. It was narrated by the personal attendant of Nolini Kanta Gupta, Nolini Da, his personal attendant Animadi. And she shared this incident where at the early stages, when they were all more like friends of Sri Aurobindo, not even formal disciples, many of them were not in yoga, they were his co-participants in the freedom struggle. They were here out of devotion, loyalty, but not really necessarily consciously in the yoga. So there was a certain phase in which Nalini was going back to his town, to his wife, fathering a child, coming back. Again, after a year, going back and forth. And at some stage, he's in Sri Aurobindo's room, wiping the dust from the books. He's there assisting for something, wiping the dust from the books. And as he's doing this, something within him shifts. Now, you must understand the shift didn't happen by chance. It is very likely an intervention from Sri Aurobindo's consciousness. So a prakamya intervention to shift, to change, to imprint a change. So as he's dusting, suddenly this thing emerges within him. And he says to himself, he thinks, I must stop this. It's enough. I can't continue this. I have to stop it. And it's as if he takes a firm decision and fixes that decision in him. Instantly, Sri Aurobindo, who's sitting behind on the chair, Sri Aurobindo says out aloud, finally. Sri Aurobindo was aware. He had been working on him through whatever pressure. At some point, that pressure has had its success, and this shift has been made with a certain firmness. Now, remember, before that, it might have happened many times. He might have thought, "Oh well, you know what? I must end this. It's enough now." What? But it's not decided. It's not fixed. The day and the moment when it becomes decisively fixed in him, he's aware, and the thing is done instantly. Sri Aurobindo, sitting behind him, says, "Finally." And Animadi narrated, obviously from the language which Nolinida had shared. He said he felt it like a slap on his cheek. Whack. And he said that evening he went back to his room and concentrated intensely. And I'm using her words. I'm assuming these are the words he would have told when he narrated to her. She said that he literally plunged into his desire nature and pulled out desire from its bleeding roots. That's the phrase Sri Aurobindo uses in Savitri, where Ashwapati does that whole exercise of pulled out desire from with its bleeding roots. So that whole exercise, it's a literal description. The desire itself forms through tentacles, entering, penetrating layers and layers within you, and spreads like tentacles, like roots dividing in your entire, typically lower vital nature, and it splits into finer traces. When you pull it out, normally you break a stem, well, it regrows like a plant which is embedded in soil. It regrows. So if you really want to get rid of it, you kind of pull it out from all those roots. But the roots are embedded in your nature. So if you really tear it out, the tearing leaves a whole bleeding exercise, a bleeding experience. Your material, your substance has been torn out. So he went through that whole exercise through the entire night. He tore out the desire. And she quotes from Savitri with its bleeding roots, and then offered it up to the divine and got rid of it. And through the whole night. And then she said, for the next 1 month, he had intense diarrhea. It had a physical shock to the system because it hits deep into your life energies where they blend into the physical body. You tear out from there, it creates a huge disturbance, and it takes a while for the wound to heal. And all this is in the subtle body, really. He does that, and after that, never again he had that difficulty. But you see here a glimpse of how Sri Aurobindo is working on people. They are not formal disciples. They're not even saying to him, "Hey, I want to do your sadhana." It's there implicit. They're having fun. They're playing football. They're eating, chatting, gossiping. Typical boys of that age, one would say. And Sri Aurobindo is working on them in a certain way, perceiving what's happening in them, intervening in this way. So this is just a Vyapti from Saurin about tea, but you understand what state of consciousness Sri Aurobindo lived in and worked on the sadhakas around him. This example would be much more suggestive of the nature of the yoga interventions that Sri Aurobindo made. Now comes a fascinating entry. This is 14th February, 1911. Memory by inspiration. The passages of Kalidasa written out and translated by me a year and a half ago. Not since read or remembered. So 1909, early stage. He has translated passages of Kalidasa. He's one of the greatest poets in Indian history and in world history, probably. Sri Aurobindo has translated. Not since read or remembered. No effort has been made at any point. Were again read 2 or 3 times in the morning without particular attention to the words, except to 1 or 2 lines. So he's casually reading through, no attention to words. 1 or 2 lines, he pays more attention. That's about it. He's read a little bit. Then later on, memory began to restore the whole thing, not by effort to remember, for that hampered it, but by inspiration. So now remember, this is one of the 4 facets of intuition. So intuition is a more touch-like contact. Inspiration is a auditory contact. You hear as if in words. Revelation is a visionary visual contact, and discrimination is distinguishing. But the inspiration here is in the hearing, as if in the mind's hearing or the higher consciousness hearing, the flow of the intuitive inspiration flows and it starts restoring the whole thing. And if he tries to remember, it interferes. If he does not make the effort to remember, it continues in the flow to restore it. Now remember, you have looked at the text casually, as if read through, but not paying attention. Set it aside, and afterwards the whole thing starts flowing through. You try to remember, oh, what was the next, and it blocks. You let it happen, and the thing flows. That's why he calls it memory by inspiration. So later on, memory began to restore the whole thing, not by effort to remember, for that hampered it, but by inspiration. Lines came, framework or substance of thoughts were suggested, gaps filled up. So lines come, framework, thought content, and then the words form and fill in. You see how the intuition works? Finally, the whole of the first passage with the mistake of two words in Sanskrit, dahati for jwalati. We don't need to go into that. It's a mistake, and he recognizes the mistake in the first passage. The whole of the second with no error. The last two lines of the third, and two words with an error of the first line, and the part of the second line in the fourth were remembered. So first passage, one word is wrong, whole of second without error. He's documenting in detail how the whole thing was recovered, where there were errors. Now, if you understand, this is 1911, where he is still in kind of early stage of his sadhana, 2 years down, and he's able to get that kind of recall from inspiration, not by physical effort of remembrance. You can understand what happens in the 1949 and 50 when he's dictating Savitri, because he had eyesight issues. So he would be dictating, Nirod Baran would be noting. Later on, Nirod Baran would reread the lines and Sri Aurobindo would make corrections, each time lifting the whole text higher and higher as part of his sadhana and his gift to humanity. But then Nirod Baran narrates how, at the last stage, it's as if Sri Aurobindo had decided to leave the body and he was hurrying through to finish Savitri. And sometimes in a single day, there will be several dozens of lines new dictated, or he would suddenly say, go back to that particular line of that canto, add a comma there, or change this word to that. Now, he is not holding a paper in front of him. And I don't know whether one can hold the entire text in memory, but you understand the working of the memory by inspiration, natural to the higher state of consciousness of the intuitive mind, and he's in way beyond in the supramental consciousness. And in that state, he's drawing out whatever is necessary, making corrections, dictating. And occasionally it would happen that he had given a particular word or line dictated. It goes to the press. They've made a mistake. It comes back. He detects there's an error and he makes a correction, not with the old line, but with the new word or line added and so on. Interesting. You get an insight of the way the intuition was within him developing and the memory which comes by inspiration. There will be a simpler memory of revelation and a memory of intuition. And all of these you will find Sri Aurobindo documents in great detail in the Synthesis of Yoga when he describes the working of the intuitive mind or the supramental consciousness eventually, and the supramental senses and the supramental memory and so on. Everything he has written later on is based on his experiences and the mastery which he has built through these years. And then the next entry is cognition in reference to image of the watch that the final epic inspiration would begin from the time indicated, 10:30, fully confirmed by fact. So final epic inspiration, probably he was writing something, and the cognition in reference to image of the watch. He has a perception, 10:30, he sees the image, and the intuition tells him this is relating to this text he's going to write. Fully confirmed, that's when the inspiration begins. I'll just complete this two more because they're indications of time. 15th February 1911. Cognition that the third time indicated in the watch, 7:20, would be fulfilled today by the final inspiration of the dramatic faculty, confirmed by fact. So remember earlier he had given the drishti for the numbers. Last entry here. Cognition from a drishti of the drishti is seeing, sight, of the face of a watch, hands at 129 or 128 or 129. That at this time, just after meals, there would be a fresh advance in the Siddhi. So he's getting perceptions of his own sadhana, when things would move, when they would have difficulty, etc. Finally, after some false speculation in other directions than the Siddhi, the general poetical inspiration was fixed on, fulfilled, since it began at 128 and was definite at 129. So you see how the hands that he sees on the watch, is it 128 or 129? It's unclear. He's documenting both numbers because he can't make out. It's as if it's both. And when it actually happens, it starts at 128 and becomes stabilized and definite at 129. So you see how the perception also functions. And if you were used to a mentalization of an image, your mind would slip it to a particular position. In the intuitive consciousness, there's a kind of a blur. It's as if both at the same time. And he has documented that. And it's like, because that's the gap, 28 to 29, where the whole transition takes place. So again, it's a fascinating passage. Okay, I'll continue with another page now. This is titled Notes on Prophetic Vision, 1929. And now this is already after the ashram has been established. Many things are happening. Why is Sri Aurobindo bothering to note? Because it's no more about his perceptions. He is describing other people's perceptions. So why is he bothering to note? I've already mentioned this a few sessions ago. I will explain this at the end again. So first entry. Some 10 days before August 15th, 1929, Venkatraman at Soup sees himself in a vision falling from branch to branch of a tree. Not Sri Aurobindo's, it's Venkatraman who's having this. Half an hour afterwards, having returned from the Soup to his rooms, Mudaliyar's house near Treasury, for flowers to bring to the mother, he climbs a big tree of champak, misses his hold, falls from branch to branch onto the ground, and is unable to move for a few days and cannot come to the house for the 15th celebration. And Sri Aurobindo's note below this, prevision. So it is prevision of Venkatraman of his own fall that Sri Aurobindo is noting in his diary. Why would he do that? And the understanding you will gain is when you recognize that Sri Aurobindo was infusing his consciousness into these people, awakening in them all these gradation states of consciousness. And in a way, he is documenting the success of its working in them and the precision with which it is working. But also here there's a significance because he mentions 10 days before August 15th and that he cannot come for the 15th celebration. And this typically is an indication of an attack. When Sri Aurobindo, particularly in this context, 15th August is a very significant spiritual focal point and nodus of energies and powers. India became free on 15th August. Japanese surrendered on 15th August. Many other things you will find happening on 15th August. And in the ashram itself, Sri Aurobindo on that day would give a special speech and there would be a special invocation. This is predating the darshan events which began afterwards. So that he couldn't come for the 15th August celebration. That itself is indicative of a hostile attack to prevent. Second entry. A lottery is arranged for the distribution among the sadhaks of articles of small value in order to see how the forces work on different people. Now, Sri Aurobindo and the mother are experimenting on the working of the force on different people. And for this, a lottery is arranged. So to many of the sadhakas, it is like, oh, let's have a fun, it's a Christmas time or whatever. You have a lottery. You're not thinking of what's happening from their perspective, what they're doing, to see how the forces work on different people. Before the distribution of tickets, Amrita sees in vision the number 61. He actually gets the number 62. On inquiry, he learnt that by mistake, 2 tickets had been distributed to one sadhak. Otherwise, he would have received number 61. Interesting. So he's seeing this, or he's seen 61. The thing is about to happen. Something has intervened, slight error, 2 tickets were given, so he gets the next in sequence, 62. So why? If it's a true prevision, it would have taken into account that there was also going to be this error, right? So what does it mean? And Sri Aurobindo explains. Telepathic vision of the thing that was about to happen, not prevision. Prevision would have been accurate. It would have included the fact that there would be these errors and given the final outcome. That would be true prevision. This is telepathic vision of the thing that was about to happen. Now, again, it's a nuance for us, but in the way things work, that distinction is critical for precision, accuracy, and reliable outcomes, isn't it? So many people may have telepathic vision of the thing that is about to happen. So it's as if you're picking up a trend line of something which is happening right now, or something which is already in the case. Let's say you have a fruit bag which is going to be given to you and they've already put an orange. You've got a telepathic vision of it. It's not prevision. Telepathic vision of what it is right now. Prevision would have included the outcome correctly also. But so again, Amrita is saying this. Amrita mentions it to Sri Aurobindo, obviously. Sri Aurobindo bothers to note it for this reason. Because they were experimenting with how the force works on different people through this. Now, there were many other experiments the mother did later on. Of course, they have done things with the animals, which I mentioned, but with the human beings, there were other such experiments. One of them would be when the mother would throw toffees. So she could have given them, but from a certain distance, she was going up the stairs, she stops, so you're there, throw a toffee, throw a flower. The person catches or misses, or it falls on his hand, but he's unable to close and bounces out. And all of these are indicative, physically, of the relationship with the force. When she was playing tennis, similarly, it was on this level. Receptivity of forces, relation to the divine, throwing back to the divine. You see, you're throwing the ball. What's the attitude with which you do? And if there is within you some part which has a rancor or some disturbance or a resistance or even an opposition, it will come in the stroke. And sometimes it would happen, you see, normally when you're playing tennis, you would want to, if you're playing with the mother, you want to swing so that the ball would come easily to where she can hit back. And very often, the mother commented that those who had some issues, their ball would come and strike her body rather than get aimed where it would have been convenient for her. So these were all indications of receiving, throwing, receiving, exchanging on different levels of energies or consciousness, and particularly in this case, the spiritual force. I will have one very interesting incident which took place long back. It's not something which happens often, so I don't mind sharing this because it's one of those rare things. I was it's one of those times when I was in a very special state, largely because of what my teacher, MP Pandit, was doing in me. And I think at that point he had just passed on, and I was still somewhat suffused with that whole imprint of what he had put. And at that time, we had the Christmas celebrations in the ashram, and they had all kinds of fun and games. And one of the things was lottery. I had helped to write the software for that along with somebody else. And it was based on a random number generator. You pressed a space bar and it would keep counting the moment you pressed a space bar, it would do a modulo division and throw a number. And if the number had already been released, it would pick another one and throw it. So it was a nice software. It was genuinely random. And so we were all one after the other going to the computer there, hitting the space bar. And I had one of my friends who was struggling to get married. His parents wanted him to get married. He wanted to. It was somehow not happening. And then I had another friend who was after him, and then it was me. So the first friend, I kind of put a strong intention. He should win the lottery and it will be symbolizing that he will get married. I held that intention. We went, and as he went to hit the lottery, it was his turn. He suddenly backed off, and the second friend he pushed forward. He said, "You do first." And the force was already set. So this guy gets pushed forward, he hits, and he gets the lottery. And he got married within a year. Interesting. My friend, though, sort of almost missed that thing. He didn't get married from that point, another 10 years, I think. I was so upset. I don't know, why did you do that? He didn't understand why I was upset. And then it came to my turn. So at that point, I said, okay, I'm going to win the lottery. And I held that intention. And as I hit the bar, I got the lottery also. So it was very clear in my own experience that the intention held in that state had its effect. Both won the lottery as intended. The person who was to have won kind of threw away his chance. It's as if a packet of energy which was directed to him, he passed on to another one who got the full benefit of it. He got nothing. Interesting. And this is a bit like this 61, 62 number. Fascinating experiences. Okay, so last entry which Sri Aurobindo has on this 1929 date. Third entry. On Monday, 23rd February 1929, at soup, the mother sees among a number of other visions the son of Madame Gabelle with a broken arm bandaged, but attaches no importance to it. Now, obviously, the mother has reported to Sri Aurobindo. But among a number of other visions at soup, remember this is soup ceremony? The mother is invoking the force, connecting people to various overmental godheads. It's a very special state in which she is herself embodying those godheads as she infuses them onto others. Among a number of other visions, she sees this, because obviously other visions might have been more important. She doesn't attach much importance to this. This was Monday. On Thursday, she meets Madame Gabelle and is told that her son broke his wrist at football on Monday. And it was put in plaster before the time of the vision. At the moment, she was praying earnestly that the mother might give her help for the arm to cure. So when mother had this vision, at the time Madame Gabelle was praying intensely for the help. So Sri Aurobindo's comment, silent communication from the mind of another, a waking telepathic vision. So Madame Gabelle is praying. The mother is receiving this. It's awakening in her telepathic vision of what happened. Interesting. So Sri Aurobindo is using a precise vocabulary describing exactly what happens, and not just blurring everything on, oh, I had an intuition, oh, I had a vision, oh, I had clairvoyant sight, or whatever. These are blurred terms of the, I will say, ordinary folks. When you actually enter into the kind of precision Sri Aurobindo has of all these phenomena, and the precision with which he describes, and all this precision he holds in all his writings on these phenomena including, but in all other writings. And on these phenomena, again, he has this precision in his synthesis of yoga when he describes the principles along which certain things operate. But it shows you the clarity distinctions he makes between these terms and also the distinction of their operations. So notes on prophetic vision, that's the title given to these entries. I don't know if the editor added it or Sri Aurobindo wrote it, doesn't matter. And now, today we might not have too much time, but I will complete with the last one here, which also I had promised for a while. So there are other things which we will see next time, which are much more, which represent his higher working, much more developed. 1914, for example, he is describing events in the world and confirmation of those events. So here is no date, psychological note is all that's written. These are independent notes. No particular date is assigned to them between 1910 and 1914. So we don't know exactly what. I just read from note number 2, but I'll come to the real one, which I intend now. Note number 2, bhasha, speech, spoken word. But literally it means here the knowledge of the higher knowledge of Sanskrit language itself, which we have studied in some way before. But he's now writing these things. He's perceiving the true underlying nature of the divine language and the root sounds and their working, etc. So regarding this whole thing, he intends it to be one of his major works for humanity, to reveal that knowledge. So bhasha, and it relates to his writing about this also. The intuition continues to work, not perfectly. The inspiration, you see the distinction. The inspiration develops on the connection of Tamil with Old Sanskrit, pointing out lost significations, old roots, otherwise indiscoverable derivations. So in the language itself, in the way it survives today, we have lost so many roots and derivations of the roots. And he is receiving all that through the inspiration and the parallels between Tamil and Old Sanskrit. What are those lost signs, symbols, old roots, otherwise undiscoverable derivations? There's no other way you will be able to access those, but he has got them through that direct inspiration. And then number 3, he writes, all this is relating to bhasha, about the language. Number 3, the supreme inspiration, yet inoperative. So the intuition is working to develop bhasha. The inspiration is working with all this extraordinary knowledge which you have no other access to by current means. And the supreme inspiration, yet inoperative, meaning he's waiting for that still higher working and its perfect working to become active. Then thought. That was about bhasha, thought. Quiet and no longer subject to obstruction, but not yet perfectly satisfying, liable to be displaced, working often with the perception only, defective in driving force, therefore imperfectly convincing. Amazing precision of all the facets of thought development. So thought is quiet, no longer subject to obstruction. So nothing can come in the way when the thought flows. There is no more of any number of obstructions one could have, inertia, distortion, mixture, etc. But not yet satisfying, not yet perfectly satisfying. So he's aiming at for a still higher perfection to that flow. Liable to be displaced, working often with perception only. So the thought has a perception. Defective in driving force, therefore imperfectly convincing. So although it convinces, that has not yet attained perfection. Imagine in speech or in writing that somebody is conscious of these facets of thought and the power of expression and is working to make them perfect. And he's very close. From the human level, you say, oh, wow, this is amazing. But he says it's not yet reached the perfection that he's aiming at. Sight. Obviously, the inner sight. In Samadhi, the lingas of the bodies, all except Jyotik and Varnaghana. I don't know what to make of this, but this would be simply representing symbols of the bodies or the deeper spiritual power behind. I do not know what Jyotik and Varnaghana represent. I can translate the word, but it would not say much. So Jyotik would represent some luminosity, and Varnaghana would be this dense characteristic of the quality of color or the temperament. But that's about all. This something he's seeing. The Jagrat, awakened, mainly inoperative, Jagrat sight, waking sight, mainly inoperative, except the momentary manifestation of the Pranamaya Purusha. So he's able to see the Pranamaya Purusha momentarily. That is the life being, the being of the vital body. Angushta Matra, like a thumb-sized being, from the Sukshma, subtle, fulfilling the prophecy of the day. So that morning he had the prophecy that he would be able to perceive this, and momentarily he was able to perceive it. Then about prophecy. He's writing how things are moving in his sadhana on these different things. So prophecy as above. The mind deals with the past by means of perception, not revelation. Necessarily, no proof. So in dealing with the past, you have a perception of the mind, but the revelatory functioning is not yet active in that seeing of the past. What does that mean? You see, these are nuances of experience which actually, when you begin to have those, you'll say, oh, that's what it is. Oh, yeah, he's describing it so accurately. But when you don't have it, you say, my God, what would that be like? Doubt. Remember, there's the facet of the development of pure faith in the whole being in relation to the divine Shakti. So where is the doubt or condition of the doubt working? It has to be fully removed and replaced by faith. So doubt only in anna, anna being matter or food, but in this case matter, and with regard to particulars in their details. So when the full faculties are flowing, it is with complete conviction and faith in the relationship with the working of the divine force in you. Except in details and particulars, there's a little bit of doubt, or in things which are entirely material. Asus, I'm not sure what that is, working absolutely in the body and with more force than formerly in the buddhi and prana. Satvik krodha, force of anger, in the chitta manifests free from the rajasic taint of an unsatisfied prana, prema, affection or love. Bhoga samarthyam increasing but insufficient. Bhoga is enjoyment, samarthya, strength. The strength to enjoy all impact of all senses, of all contact with the world on all levels, broadly. So the capacity to hold that which is imprinting into you, the strength to hold and enjoy all that comes, irrespective of how painful or difficult. You can still experience enjoyment when you live in that consciousness. This is increasing but insufficient. But you see the earlier line, satvik krodha, force or anger, in the chitta, mind awareness, manifests free from rajasic taint of an unsatisfied prana. So there's the when the prana is unsatisfied, it gives to it a rajasic twist. But in the mind, it is free of this disturbance. And there can be this pure mental force. No, this is not acceptable. So it's a sattvic anger. It's not a rajasic, and it does not have the mixture of the prana and the agitation that comes from its dissatisfaction mixing in. Precise awareness, perfectly separating, freeing, purifying in all these levels of his being. It's amazing. Then he speaks of Aishwaryam. There's the power of the will acting through various means. The will began to act directly. So Aishwaryam, etc. So he's including the full spectrum of all three. The will began to act directly from the Sahasradala with swift and invariable, though not instantaneous effect. So from the center above, the 1,000-petal lotus, Sahasra, 1,000, Dala, petaled center, directly from there the will, capital W, so the higher will, with swift and invariable, though not instantaneous effect. The imperative vyaptis still resisted. So when there is a vyapti which is asserting itself, imperative, it still experiences a resistance. that it acts, but there's a resistance. That itself has to go. So the perfection he's aiming towards. And then a general deficiency of force experienced. The old humanity very strong in the annam material. And through the annam, obstructive but not dominant in the whole system. So from the physical consciousness, it obstructs in other layers, but it doesn't dominate the other layers. Now, we don't know the date of this. It's probably at an early stage of the sadhana itself. But it's a good example of the kind of daily notes he might have had about various things. Here's another thing I want to read because it gives you a sense of the distinctions between terms that he uses. Note number 7. 12 types. Perhaps they relate to facets, aspects. Wisdom, greatness, calm, strength, speed, wrath, love, joy, prodigality, intellect, desire, service. Types of what we don't know, but... And then 7 anandas. Kama, prema, ahaituka, chid, sudha, nirguna, siddha. So 7 anandas, 12 types, equals 84 worlds. So 7 types of ananda with 12 types of what we don't know. The combination is 84 worlds. With 7 below, 9 above equals 100. And then 7 worlds, with the below, he talks Gandharva, beauty, Yaksha, pleasure, Kinnara, fantasy, Aghora, Samata, Swadhina, freedom, Deva, love, Asura, might and glory, from lowest to highest. So he's describing gradations of worlds and the characteristic of those worlds. Now, if you have read or heard stories narrated to you from the Indian traditions, you've heard these terms Gandharvas, Yakshas, Kinnaras, Aghoras, Deva, Asura. They're all beings of various domains of worlds. What distinction between Gandharva and Yaksha, between Kinnara, we don't know. We don't care. We've just been told, oh, they are subtle beings, that's all. But distinct words and the vocabulary used for those words and the characteristics of those words. It's amazing. So he's describing domains. Now, these are not things he's describing from theory. He's perceiving them. He's observing and describing the structure of these worlds. So I'm skipping this. There's more about various domains and the higher worlds and terms. I'm coming now to the main thing which I wanted to read now. Okay, one more in interval. Note number 8, memory. 1 of things noticed, 2 of things unnoticed, of events, of objects and men, of words and ideas. Just writing memory of all these things. They're as if distinct functions or aspects of memory, all of which have to be perfected, I suppose. Events. And so in the perception, what are the things which have to be perfected? The occurrence, number 1, the occurrence of the event. A, in mass. B, in detail. C, the sequence and arrangement of details. So when you have a perception of an event, you have a general mass perception. Then you have a perception in which the details are shown. And then in the details, the sequence and arrangement of the details. All of these have to be perfected. 2, the time, date, hour, minute. You have to have that. Otherwise, it's not a complete perception. 3, the place, spot, surroundings, relation of different spots to the event. So it's not enough that you have this location. What are the circumstances and surroundings? And then what is the relation of this with other spots and other events? 4th, the nimitta or surrounding circumstances. You must be able to perceive that also. So remember, all of these are normal operations of any perception, whether intuitive, whether precognitive, whether telepathic. But in any perception of an event, all these things need to be completely present to be called a perfect perception. That's the standard he's setting for himself in his experiences. Objects, akar, meaning form, including all the 5 vishayas and every detail with regard to them. I don't know exactly what the 5 vishayas are, but they represent 5 facets of description of the form. Second, nama, the name or nomen, the word by which signifies the thing. And then 3, the thing itself. So you see in degrees from the outer form, then the force behind, and then the thing itself. A single, B combined. Then with regard to words and ideas, 1, sound, 2, symbol, 3, meaning, 4, bhava, meaning quality or mood or state, and 5, relation. Memory also of contrast, comparison, analogy. That is, memory of the things in relation to other things. So all these have to come. What are the means of memory? 1, reception, 2, attention, 3, repetition, 4, association, 5, will. Means by which you could develop or perfect the memory. Okay, so this is just glimpses of various things he writes in the Record of Yoga, not always explaining what it is, but they give you a glimpse of the way he was approaching this perfection of the working of his consciousness. Now we come to a very interesting note. This is note number 9, and it's called, the title is Psychological Notes. And this is regarding the butterfly that he observes. And I will read and pause and comment as we go along. A butterfly comes flying over the garden, past a pepe gach. Pepe gach is papaya tree. Past a pepe gach and 2 flower trees which grow side by side. Ordinarily, it will be attracted to one of these 3 objects of desire. It flies past without noticing them, reaches the wall in a straight flight. Then, contrary to all expectation, turns suddenly back, turns aside while flying over the right-hand flower tree to dally for 2 seconds with another butterfly, then flies back, flies off through the pepe gach, papaya tree. Gone. Oh, flies off through the pepe gach. So I suppose from where it came. What dictated its return and departure? So it went, returned, and departed, whichever direction. What dictated its return and departure? Why is Sri Aurobindo bothering with such a thing? He's just observed a butterfly. It's not as if he's doing a mental exercise of reason and logic to figure out what is happening. Why would a butterfly behave? It's not speculative as most of our scientists, sociologists, botanists, psychologists, or others would have done. We observe, what does it matter? Randomly, these butterflies go. We don't give it any importance. Why is Sri Aurobindo bothering to write? And it's a pretty long description what happens. Because in Sri Aurobindo's consciousness, by his vyapti, prakamya, perception, he's experiencing what is happening in the butterfly. And he documents exactly what he perceives in that experience. First, he says, it did not notice the flower tree because its mind was fixed on some more distant object present to its instinctive memory. So he's describing what's happening in the butterfly's consciousness. Its mind was fixed on some more distant object present to its instinctive memory. So in the instinctive memory, which is an automatic grade, there's something which it recalls and the mind is fixated there. It is so fixated, it ignores what happens nearby immediately. So, but by a law of the mind, it received subconsciously the impression of the scent from the flowers. So its mind is fixated, it's going, it's passing through a domain where there's the scent of the flowers, it has crossed it, and by the law of the mind, subconsciously the impression of the scent arises and kicks in. By the time it reached the wall, this came up to the supraliminal mind as a vague but powerful sense of something missed and attractive on the way. So initially, when the subconscious impression of the scent from flowers comes in, it's registered in the machinery of the biology. It rises through gradations in the supraliminal. So subliminal and supraliminal, these are 2 domains. What's happening subliminally happens. It is conscious internally, but you are not conscious of it. When it comes into your supraliminal consciousness, it comes into surface. Oh, I'm aware of this. But it was already registered long ago. So something of that has risen. By the time he reaches the wall, This has risen up into the supraliminal consciousness. But at that point, what has come up is not, oh, there are flowers. A vague but powerful sense that something is missed and attractive on the way. Oh, there was something so attractive and I missed it and I don't know what it is. Now remember, he has got two states, the butterfly. One is the fixation of the mind on a distant object present to its instinctive memory. And now this supraliminal perception which has come up emerged that something was missed, but it was attractive. These two are competing. What happens next? Working through the vital instincts and cravings by vital impulse, which dominantly determines the movements of the insect, this sense immediately enforces a backward flight. So this thing rising works through the vital instincts and cravings. And that triggers vital impulses. I need to, which dominantly determines the movement of the insect. Now, this insect is not a rational being. So the drive of this vital craving, vital impulse is its dominant drive. And this immediately enforces a backward flight. So the butterfly turns around and starts going back. Now, if the same thing had happened in a dog or a human being, then it would have awakened these cravings and would have struggled with other layers, which, depending on the person, might be more or less dominant. But in this case, it's the butterfly, and so the vital instinct and craving driven by vital impulse are dominantly determining. So it immediately enforced a backward flight. If the other butterfly had not intervened, so as it goes back now, it's going to look for what is it that's missed. Meanwhile, another butterfly comes. It had dallied briefly and then went away too. So if the other butterfly had not intervened, it is possible that at the second contact with the scent of the flowers, the vague sense would have identified itself, consciously or subconsciously, with a definite supraliminal expression, and the descent on the flowers would have been determined. So as it's coming back, the sense will again rise. And as it rises, at some point it will activate with the familiarity. Flower sense. Oh, this is familiar, or this is what I'm looking for, consciously or subconsciously. And once it becomes definite in the supraliminal layer, the descent on the flowers would have been determined. The butterfly would have settled on the flowers and drunk. Would have been determined. So at that point, the determination happens. Till then, it is in vagueness and competing energies, impulses, and still open to modification. And then the modification that happens is that a second butterfly appears. But the diversion once made, the vagueness not only remained, the vagueness of the flower scent, but the impression was half obliterated, and only the idea of return to something in the distance remained. So what had happened was, as it passed, the impression had come up, something important was missed. That got overridden and mixed and replaced by this new experience. Oh, another butterfly. And that is obliterated, half obliterated. So what remains is only the idea of that something in the distance. This, however, was strong enough to divert the insect from its fellow. So even it didn't stay too long with the other butterfly, especially as the latter was concerned with the flowers and did not respond to the advances made. So the other butterfly was too interested in the flowers, didn't respond too much. Otherwise, it might still have been attracted. It got not enough response. That dominant thing remained. Hence the farther pursuit of the flight backwards. And it goes back on its way. Now, it's a very detailed, precise description. You could have exactly the same detailed, precise description of what happens inside a human being. And we will see some examples of that later. But it gives you an idea that in our consciousness, we have the ability to perceive exactly and in detail all that happens in every being, in every conscious being or even other, including butterflies. However low they may be in a certain gradation of evolution of mind, they're still very rich in their domain of experience at the grade at which they live. And you can experience that, know and understand and appreciate with full richness of nuances. Now, why would this be important? If at that point Sri Aurobindo intervenes by putting a particular prakamya, or a certain intention of Aishwarya or Vashita, some intervention of some kind, at what level does it hit? What is it competing with from what exists within the butterfly? And how is the modification made? To what extent the modification is compromised by other influences, such as the memory of the flower or that original impulse of that distant thing it was chasing? All that is going to be important if you really want to understand and make perfect the nature of the intervention. Interesting, isn't it? Imagine doing that with a human being and then observing how they respond, how they don't respond, what are the internal conflicts they go through, etc. We'll look at some example of that later. So I think what I will close with one reading. This is much later now, 1913. Fourth year of his sadhana, 17th January, maybe 3.5 years, fourth year, let's say. Here he comments, the final development of Aishwarya has been definitely undertaken. So this power of the will acting on circumstances through various 4 different ways. Final development has been definitely undertaken. So initially, anything which happens, momentarily it appears, drops, appears, drops. At some point it comes and takes it up. Now this movement is definitely undertaken. Till then, it had been glimpses of that finality. You had Aishwaryam greatly powerfully, but the final form of it, the final development is now taken with a definiteness. That's all. It's a fine distinction. It doesn't mean it didn't happen before. Okay. Aishwarya, in effect, is of 3 kinds currently in his consciousness. 1, that which creates a tendency or produces an effect, but does not eventually or at all succeed. So tendency is evoked, an effect is created, but it may not, it doesn't succeed finally, but it does push. 2, that which produces the final effect, but slowly, with difficulty, against an effective resistance. This still works out, there's a resistance and the resistance is effective. So delays. 3, that which produces the final effect, not as a combatant, but victoriously as a master. So when this third form of Aishwarya operates, it is a true Aishwaryam, mastery, and victoriously, no combative, contrary force, there's no fight, no struggle. Smoothly it flows out and achieves perfectly. So there are 3 kinds in the current operation. The first has to be eliminated from the Siddhi henceforth. So no more lack of success, because it's the final development of Aishwaryam. The second has to be preserved for a time, meaning you will have delays, but for a while only. The third, to be continually strengthened until it replaces all the others. This will be the victorious, effortless, smooth, no combative resistance, opposition, mastery. And this has to replace in the working of the other 2. So they're actually as if 3 facets or operations of Aishwarya, and he's making this transition now to the final development of this. So again, a glimpse of a typical entry of a day. Program. Yesterday's program has to be completed. Trikala Drishti has to get rid of the remnants of false stress, which constitute now its one remaining positive defect. So mostly Trikala Drishti is operating perfectly. One remaining positive defect is the false stress, a tendency of something stressing, modifying slightly, and that has to be got rid of. Aishwarya to illumine itself with the knowledge of the divine will. So the Aishwaryam is working, and it has to now fully be lit up by the working of the knowledge of the divine will. For up till now, it has only got rid of the urgency which impelled it to employ itself blindly and merely for exercise. So it had to do this, it has to develop this, and so now it has to open more and more to this working of the divine will and the knowledge of the divine will. It has also to confirm the movement, excluding ineffectual applications. Lipi, the script, has attained to successful vividness. It has still to attain to easy vividness. So it's successful, but the ease has to come now. Rupa and Samadhi, form, perception of things, and the state of Samadhi, deep immersion in states of consciousness, must continue their struggle. Kamananda, the delight in the physical consciousness of the body itself, successful in the afternoon, was slight and rare in the evening. It must expel the hesitation in the body which prevents it from domiciling itself in the sthula. So when he speaks of the body, remember it has also gradations. There's the subtle physical all the way to the gross physical. So sukshma is the subtle physical, sthula is the gross physical. So he says there is a hesitation in the body which prevents this delight from settling fully and permanently in the gross physical. That hesitation has to be eliminated. So you see, initially the body itself would have gone through many other stages if you study the whole unfolding of the record of yoga. So there would be stages where the body doesn't have the faith. It's not able to or willing to open, or it opens but the faith is lacking, or the faith is mixed and with severe relapses of faith. And then eventually it builds the faith, but it still hesitates. And this is the hesitation remaining, which prevents the full settling of the ananda permanently in the gross physical state. Arogya, health and perfect health, although much stronger, does not yet exclude the return of the symptoms which it has expelled. So it's strong, it expels something, but there's a tendency for the thing to return. These affections must now be compelled to disappear. The will act now to compel this. Secondary uttapana, levitation or making the body light and free from tiredness, which maintained in the afternoon and at night its efficiency, except for a stronger attack of adhogati, downward movement, and defective anima. The anima is the subtilization, and that is still defective, must increase the force of pure mahima in order to combat this deficiency. So you have discussed anima and mahima, remember? But the amplification of the pure force must be increased to combat this deficiency which is there. Now you see here, just in a passing reference, he's summarizing the general working in his sadhana of all these different operations. I'm skipping much more that follows afterwards. And we'll just conclude with the last, which is coming from his perceptions. The news today confirms Trikala Drishti. So he's seeing in his vision the past, present, future, especially the Vyapti Prakamya in a striking fashion. So the perception and engagement in action, the imprint comes and he pushes for an outcome in the imprint. That's Vyapti Prakamya. What is it he's seeing? The news confirms the hesitations in Constantinople. So you'll go back to see what happened at that time in Constantinople. There was this whole thing happening around, I believe, the the Caliph of Turkey, who was trying to take over, etc. So the fears of the ministers about disruption and defeat, the want of real unanimity among the powers, the easier state yet continuance of the Romanian difficulty. So in Romania, there's some difficulty and he's working on that. And this is being confirmed in the Trikala Drishti. The news confirms what the Trikala Drishti has seen. Fresh wrecks. So wrecks of particularly ships. One unexpected event is the murder of Komila. So that was not seen, but it came in the news. So now imagine he's receiving daily news. He reads the newspaper for this reason, to validate his work in world affairs. That's all, not for news, because you can see the news is mostly lies. And occasionally something pops up that he had not foreseen. You see how that works? It's amazing. Imagine picking up the newspaper. Everything you read is confirming what you already had seen when it happened, or you were even intervening and you're confirming that's okay, what your intervention worked. And then once in a while, something pops up. This I missed. I didn't see that happen. So one unexpected event is the murder of Komila. One only, not two unexpected events. The old Trikala Drishti and sortilege about the frequency of wrecks is confirmed by today's telegram giving the number lost. in 1912 as 228, 82 British. Now look at the precision. He's looking at exact numbers to match what he had perceived. The working of the Aishwarya, Vyapti, Ishita, three things together. They're not separate working, they're merged in their working. Aishwarya, the will action, the Vyapti, which is the incoming perception, and the Ishita, which is the spontaneous working. In great matters is also very evident. The working of the Aishwarya, Vyapti, Ishita in great matters is also very evident in the movement of the subjectivity everywhere, and to a great extent in the movement of the subjective objectivity. But it is still very deficient in the objective results. Effective, but only partially effective. So he's working in the movement of subjectivity everywhere. I am not sure how fully to understand this, but the way I would understand it is that he's working to when he says subjectivity everywhere, he's working to awaken in everywhere in the human circumstances this shift in consciousness. The basis of Adesha Siddhi and Karma Siddhi is being erected, but it is not yet sufficiently firm or sufficiently wide. These belong to other facets of the six limbs of the yoga. Then he speaks of the working of the Vijnana Siddhi, the supramental working, etc., the vastness of the supermind, etc. So I don't go into that. This gives you a glimpse of some working and about these accidents which he has seen, frequency of wrecks. There's a very interesting entry where Sri Aurobindo comments on the Titanic disaster. And this is 1912, July 2nd. He writes, I may note that a former sortilege occurring after the Titanic disaster and pointing to fresh disasters in the struggle of machinery with nature, which I had supposed to be false or falsely interpreted, is today vindicated. No less than 4 accidents, 3 fatal, 1 extensive, in 2 days in aviation. It is noteworthy that I was wondering only a day or two ago at the comparative freedom of Germany from these accidents. But these accidents, except one, I think, are in Germany. Interesting. So he's seeing this. He has already foreseen that there's going to be a series of accidents of machinery in the struggle of machinery with nature. So nature and machinery are as if in conflict. And he was wondering, why is it that Germany has not been getting too many of these accidents? It's happening everywhere, a lot of it in British or other spaces. And then he finds that it's happened, a lot of it, most of them have happened in Germany. Interesting. So he's perceiving a trend line. He notices that in the trend line, as it comes to the news, one area is particularly missing, and that does not correlate with what he has foreseen. And then the news comes that that area also has it. There's the Hindenburg disaster where this giant balloon which burnt up. I don't know if it's around this time, but a series of major disasters take place, and the Titanic is being one of them. And he describes these as struggle of machinery with nature. Remember, the Titanic itself was touted as the world's biggest ship, and it was as if out or representing humanity dominating and overwhelming nature. It was described as the unsinkable ship. Now, if an unsinkable ship had lasted many years and eventually had sunk from rusting or other, it would have still been unsinkable. But an unsinkable ship in the very first maiden voyage hits an iceberg and sinks. That's when nature has said, no way, I'm not going to allow you to dominate. You think you can not be sunk? Here, I can sink you. So it's a struggle happening at a certain level, which he's seeing on that level. Struggle of machinery with nature and the human domination. And what happens then? They don't say, hey, we'll build another better. The effort of humanity to push against nature falls back, and no other ship of that kind is ever built again. And interestingly, this ship which has sunk is not found for nearly a century. And when it is found, it still takes them 10, 15, 20 years before they can even pull up something from it. It's so deep, so well held by nature, as if saying, okay, you want to show off here, I can do much more. So you feel this struggle, and he's seeing this in the perceptions of the higher planes and the reality on those levels. So I think with this we're going to close today. Sri Aurobindo's descriptions and some of his experiences of a very preliminary kind. We're going to look at others shortly, perhaps in the next session. And you'll see more and more there the blending of these powers of action, but also perception, as well as the Trikala Drishti, all working together. So I'm going to pause here for today and quickly look at the chat box. Revati is asking, how do you interiorize so effortlessly? Is it possible to do this? Yes, absolutely. And it is not at all difficult if you have taken the trouble to exercise this movement regularly. What I see generally people do when they sit to meditate, and pretty much everywhere, you close your eyes and either daydream, drift off, which is pointless. You stay pretty much on the layer at which you are. Or many people go into some kind of visualization or repetition of mantra. Pointless again. At best, it holds attention on the thing you are at, but you are in the state in which you are. You notice that sometimes you go into a state which is very deep, almost by accident. It happened. I got pulled in, or I went into something, I don't know what, but it was really deep. I came out and it was so different. It happens, and that's all. But the thing to do consciously is to be able to go deeper consciously. And that's what the point of the meditation would be. It's a one-pointed exclusive concentration on a state or experience or a relationship of immersion with the divine, which is well beyond the normal surface regions. And if you don't take the trouble to do that, then meditation itself is kind of pointless. So you would go inward, you become aware of something deeper, shift within, wait, you become aware of something still deeper, shift within, and wait. Ideally, it would be towards the presence that you feel within you, or the aspiration that comes from within the psychic influence or source within you, or the love and devotion that you feel welling up towards the divine from within you. And you use that as a reference for the inward deepening, or a similar movement which can be an upward shifting. But in some form, the consciousness has to go deeper within or higher in its gradation. You do that, and then you come back slowly, and you do that and come back slowly. If you do that in this way daily, you build continuity. And when the continuity is built, at any point in the middle of any activity, in principle, you can become quiet, center yourself, and then gently shift, slide in, up, or whatever poise or state that you've built your normal habit of going into, and be able to shift to that state. I say normally because if there's a very strong disturbance outside, sometimes it makes it more difficult to separate. But once you're able to separate, then the entry is relatively easy and you're able to get there. So this exercise of being able to shift in grade and quality of consciousness is absolutely essential. It's the whole reason why you're supposed to meditate. If you're not doing that, it's mostly a waste of time. So yes, everybody can and should be able to do. It's just that they don't do that. They just waste time, while away the time in some feel-good relaxation, calming, but in the same state, in the same surface or layer that you live it normally. At best, there's a degree of interiorization nominally, incidentally or accidentally, not by intention. Just because you relaxed, there's a degree of interiorization. But that's nothing compared to what exists within you as depths, and you should be able to go into. So yes, absolutely, everybody can and should work on it. And that's when the whole spiritual life becomes vivid and the link is never lost. So V-Truth says these are kinds of incidents one would read in the Charitram, stories of great saints. Here, Sri Aurobindo gives them to us like a matter of fact. Yes, it's amazing. And for Sri Aurobindo, these were almost incidental, and the precision and perfection you see here, you do not find in anybody else. Oh, they had powers, they activated, they don't know how it worked, it didn't work, sometimes it worked, sometimes it was not. In Sri Aurobindo case, he's developing consciously with precision, detail, perfection, and of nuances as nowhere you will find in the history, in the spiritual history of humanity. And that's why this is such an extraordinary work. And the fact that he had a record gives validation to it. I'm actually very disappointed to see even today among devotees, there are people who speculate. Did he even reach the supermind? Maybe he didn't, he only speculated about it. We'll have occasion to discuss this after a couple of months, but this is so stupid, because if you've read even a little bit of what Sri Aurobindo gives and shares and describes, you cannot have got to that kind of precise description without having experienced it. It's so obvious, but human stupidity, I think. So Aspirer is asking, at this stage, was he still at a level where he was in the mind, or was he already lifted by the Shakti into intuitive consciousness? From the point, and you will see it documented in the record of yoga, all these siddhis begin to operate. The Trikala Drishti is operating, and the opening to the intuition has already started. After that, it's just a question of degrees. So at least within the first few months of the formal sadhana in Pondicherry, assuming that we take that as a starting point from when he comes to Pondicherry, within a few months, he's living in an intuitive consciousness or accessing it very facilely and developing and deepening that. You must also understand that these things should not be seen as all or nothing. They're always in gradations and degrees. And then more complex is what happens when the goal is not merely to enter a state, but to bring it down and transform. So you have degrees of ascension and then degrees of integration of the descending movement combined with further degrees of ascension. And so if you read the descriptions, you will get confused, because here he's talking of integration with the mind, and there he's having difficulty, but up there he's having the pure operation of the intuition totally free. And if you read and think it's only part of one movement, you make a huge mistake. And we will see when we have that discussion how certain devotees of Sri Aurobindo have mixed that up, some unintentionally, some deliberately, to use it against Sri Aurobindo to say that, oh, he was only speculating of higher ranges and didn't reach them because he was struggling here and not talking about that. It's because there's a misunderstanding of the two movements of ascension and descent. Okay. Vaibhav's question I will take another time. Okay. Sri Aurobindo worked, Sumana says, Sri Aurobindo worked through Churchill in World War II to turn it in the right direction. How come Churchill engineered Bengal famine at the same time? So you have to understand that Churchill, as other instruments which we have spoken of were disruptors also, they had their various mixed sides. And to the extent that Sri Aurobindo was able to work through them, they had extraordinary results. But they were also operative in other things where Sri Aurobindo may not necessarily have engaged in influencing. And there are also complexities one has to recognize where Churchill, as Prime Minister, is taking decisions in the interest of England, not in the interest of India. And while it might be possible to override that to some extent, it is not, it would create strong countercurrents if it was totally overridden. And you would basically turn the man into a puppet, which is not at all the functioning of the divine force. So it would help him turn to the extent that he can through his machineries and priorities in a way which is most helpful. And it is one of the interventions of Sri Aurobindo through him which allowed for the Cripps mission to be sent to India. So she asks why Sri Aurobindo Siddhis didn't intervene here. They did. But as I said, the priorities from his working being set for that. There can be a conflict of interest beyond which an assertion of will would interfere with other priorities. And we also should understand that in such operations, there are consequences both ways. Had he intervened for this particular outcome, some other things might have perhaps unfolded, which might have been more damaging. In the balance, from Sri Aurobindo's consciousness, what is seen is trend lines, and in the balance, a certain choice is made of what is best in the larger evolutionary interest. There may also be things where he did not bother to intervene. As he says in the Second World War, initially he didn't bother to intervene, and only later, when the Asuric aspect became distinct, that he intervened. Sumana again asks, in the same line, what could have come in the way to prevent the tremendous suffering of Bengali Hindus during partition? Sri Aurobindo must have tried to prevent these. Yes, absolutely. You will remember it was at that time that Sri Aurobindo was asked when that was happening. Most people may not know the background to this. At the time of India's partition, which you must remember is the largest migration in human history, when an entire country is split down the middle and people forced to cross over artificially based on some fake religious identities and political interests. And there's a massacre that's taking place at the time of the partition, when trains from Pakistan with Hindus coming to India side, the train would come, every single person had been butchered in the most gory way. The same thing was happening in Bengal. And massacre after massacre on a scale never seen before. Gandhi stood silent. It's when the Hindus fought back that he went on a fast asking the Hindus to stop fighting back. So he was unfortunately way off track. But what happened at that point? 3 days there was a massacre and the Hindus did not fight back. Gandhi said at that point a statement many other times, there's nothing wrong with Muslim brothers killing you. They are your brothers. Die happily because it's your brother killing you. Statements to that effect. The third day, this is an incident which is narrated by Champak Lal. The third day when the news of the massacre came, Sri Aurobindo stood up boldly, fists, and said, "Why don't the Hindus strike back?" It's after this that the reaction came and the counter to the massacre. And the Hindus hit back, and then Gandhi went on a fast asking everyone to stop. But yes, he did act. He did intervene. But the problem was this. At the time when Sri Aurobindo was about to leave his body, the same thing had recurred. It was going on in Bengal. Killings were going on. And I think it was Purani who asked, the divine grace will save Bengal. And Sri Aurobindo answered, if Bengal wants the divine. And so here we see the other aspect of help. Even when the help is given, are you willing to receive? Are you aligned to its action? Are you steeped in inertia? Are you steeped in confusion that prevents even the help to be effective? If you turn at that point in opening to the help, then the help can be effective. And I would generalize this whole thing to the current condition in the world and the increasing difficulties or chaos that you see in so many. If humanity chooses, then things will change more rapidly and with less suffering. Otherwise, it is through suffering that they will change. Vaijayanti asks about there's some story about a mummy being present on the Titanic, which causes accidents. I don't know. I don't know about this. There are many stories around that, including the story that it had all the key people who were against the establishment of the US Federal Bank, and they all died. And the person who did not go on that particular ride then took charge and formed the federal bank. So there are many interests, perhaps, which converged on that. Nevertheless, the story still remains, and the incident is a fact that it was a collision with the iceberg. And it was like this. The ship was designed that it could have a head-on collision with an iceberg and would never sink. What happened in practice was it was not a head-on collision. As it was approaching the iceberg, the ship was turned slightly. The iceberg banged on the side, and even then it could have been unsinkable because a bang on the side, it would have survived. It banged on the side and then scratched and scratched and scratched and made a huge gash that ripped one full side. That's when the unsinkability was pushed to its limit and it started tilting. And then eventually the breakup. So what you see, and this is irrespective of all else. Yes, there could be many other interests, and let's set that aside. The physical cause of it was still this, that it was ripped apart in a way that it was not designed to survive. So the unsinkability was genuine within parameters. And this is a fact of any human creation. There will be parameters. Nature, as if in the very first maiden voyage, went or ensured going beyond those parameters to ensure the sinking. And suddenly that put a stop to so much of what was happening and domination of nature. Perhaps the same thing if humanity had approached not by domination but by collaboration, we might even have built more grand marvels. In collaboration, nature would have actually supported them rather than saying, okay, I hit back. So Aspire is asking, does it mean that the Vijnana Chatushtaya Siddhi comes only when one is uplifted in the intuition fully? I'll state it differently. The Vijnana Chatushtaya, that is the supramental limb of the yoga, is this ascending movement to the supermind, which includes incidentally the Siddhis as part of it, but it includes Trikaldarishti and intuition. It's as we begin this ascent, because these are properly powers of the supermind, as we begin this ascent that the powers truly acquire their spiritual character. Before that, they can have a reflected operation in the mind or in the vital. That's why most of the examples I gave the last two sessions were operations in the vital, which are secondary and lower workings. But as we rise up, and especially with the opening of intuition, then the true working of these powers becomes active. And the intuition is a critical element. The ascent into the intuitive mind is your first point of contact to the supermind. So we're going to look at this in some detail afterwards. We'll get back to the question of the intuition and Trikaldarishti and their working. But I think this... I will conclude with this observation of the mother, because we've just discussed this fact of her statement. I will read from a couple of things she said. This is a message that the mother gave, 1964, August. Message to the first World Conference of Sri Aurobindo Society. She writes, the future of the earth depends on a change of consciousness. The only hope for the future is in a change of man's consciousness, and the change is bound to come. So don't worry, it's going to happen anyway, right? But it is left to men to decide if they will collaborate for this change or if it will have to be enforced upon them by the power of crashing circumstances. So wake up and collaborate. Blessings. Wake up and collaborate. We're asleep. If you don't wake up to this reality, you cannot collaborate. If you do wake up, you can panic or you can collaborate. So the change will happen anyway, bound to come. Change of man's consciousness. So it's left to men to decide if they will collaborate for this change of consciousness or it will be enforced upon them by the power of crashing circumstances. And as it seems to be more in the last 50 years, it seems to be more by the power of crashing circumstances that the changes are happening. They're being enforced upon us. And a few in humanity are choosing to collaborate for the change. And that's when we find the cutting edge of the human ascension and evolution. I will read one more message. A series of questions that the mother gave for discussion for the conference which was being organized. And she gives the question and also the answer. So the question she gave, how can humanity become one? And her answer, by becoming conscious of its origin. Next question. What is the way of making the consciousness of human unity grow in man? And mother's answer, spiritual education. That is to say, an education which gives more importance to the growth of the spirit than to any religious or moral teaching or to the material so-called knowledge. More importance. Doesn't mean you don't do this. More importance. That's the key element. Next question. What is a change of consciousness? Mother. A change of consciousness is equivalent to a new birth, a birth into a higher sphere of existence. Question. How can a change of consciousness change the life upon earth? Mother's answer. A change in consciousness will make possible the manifestation upon earth of a higher force, a purer light, a more total truth. So you get an indication of the direction in which she was guiding the conference itself and elaborating on the message which she had given earlier about change happening through crashing circumstances. There's another message she gave on similar lines, so I'm not rereading that, but and maybe I think we'll take this as a theme for our concentration today. Again, a message from the mother given in September 1960 to Sri Aurobindo Society. To know is good. To live is better. To be, that is perfect. So obviously to be in terms of the new consciousness more and more and to live in that as that. Let's take that as the theme for our concentration today. With all that we have read of Sri Aurobindo, we see how he was not just stuck in knowing or in doing. It was the whole change of consciousness in his very being that he recast. And that's the example he sets for us, showing you that it's possible and this is what is the future of humanity. We are reading him, it helps us to know. Perhaps we start putting into practice, that puts us on the track, but more and more as we grow into becoming that in the change of consciousness itself, that's when we would have fulfilled, that would be the result of the sadhana. Let that be our one-pointed priority. Doesn't mean you don't do other things. It's just that is more priority, more important than everything else you do. Please do those things also, but this is more important in the balance. Keep that as reference from what Mother indicated in the questions. Let's hold this in our aspiration. Namaste.